If you don't have a single definition of data governance across the organization, you're going to create a bunch of swirl.
Welcome to Unlocking Big Data, a series about getting trusted data to healthcare professionals, presented by HIMSS. HIMSS Market Insights conducted research on data analytics platforms in December 2022 to early January 2023 to understand satisfaction with current analytics platforms or solutions, integration of applications and technologies with data analytics platforms, challenges encountered with investments in analytic platforms and upgrades, and reliability and use of analytics data. 55 executives, IT, technology, and clinicians participated in the research.
Throughout the series, we'll present key data points from the research, but focus on why these key data points are important and how you can leverage these findings to support your healthcare organization's data initiatives. In our fifth and final episode, we'll look at leveraging more data for intelligent business decision-making. I'm joined by Chad Konchak, AVP of Clinical Analytics at NorthShore University HealthSystem, and Michael Meucci, CEO of Arcadia, who will help us take a deep dive into the key takeaways from the research. Welcome, Chad and Michael. So, gentlemen, as we heard, most of the users of analytics platforms today give it a meh. So what are some of the critical functionalities a data analytics platform would garner a very satisfied rating from its healthcare organization leadership?
We know as two people who are responsible for analytics platforms, that's a resounding endorsement. I personally think that one of the challenges with analytics is the broadness of the term. And you think about the broad stakeholders that consume analytics, that are focused on using data in their workflow. And Chad and I were talking about this a few minutes ago. You have financial stakeholders, you have clinical stakeholders, you have researchers, you have partners, and you can't boil the ocean. You need to be able to evaluate each of those use cases and think about how do you create that end-to-end vision of how you use analytics to drive the business forward and connect the different analytics efforts, because if you don't have a single definition of data governance across the organization, you're going to create a bunch of swirl. And I think that that's actually a big contribution of why folks are less than satisfied with their analytics platforms, because there's still so much governance and infrastructure that needs to be built around analytics to make it effective.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the average person responding to that question, right, doesn't think about an analytics platform, right? They have questions, right? And they want to run their business, and they might be the financial leader of the organization, the CFO, they might be the chief operating officer or the chief clinical officer. And really, your question about what would it look like, a great product would be when they get their answers, their questions answered really quickly and in the right way. Because what happens is they ask one group in one area and it doesn't happen very fast, or they don't like the answer, or it's not very good. So then they ask a different group and now they get different answers. And there's a big problem of, well, where do I go? And is the data even good or trustworthy? So I think it boils down to really just, can I get the information that I need to run my business?
Yeah, and controversial statement, I don't think most business stakeholders actually care what the platform is at all. They want that question answered and it's in a slide or in an Excel document. They want to be able to consume that and then take action on it. And I think that individuals and organizations have spent a lot of time over the last decade enabling self-service, where you have business users entering into a Power BI or a Tableau or other environment. And there's a huge learning curve, because you not only need to understand that technology, but you also need to have analytics capabilities or analysis capabilities. And that's a hard skill to build. And not everyone is adequately suited to do that.
No, you're absolutely right. And as individual parts of the organization see those gaps, they start proliferating even more of that problem by trying to get their small inept teams to be able to try to do those things without really focusing on core groups that can really help them first centralize all their data, centralize the governance, right? And get them the answers across its whole enterprise in a consistent and trustworthy way. So it's kind of a negative feedback loop as it keeps going.
It really is. And then it obfuscates the actual action. If you identify a trend through an analytic output, you need the business to then implement a process or a change or a redesign to then drive improvement. And all too often we get stuck questioning the data, and is the analytic right? And that's where you get this massive dissatisfaction with the platform. But the real dissatisfaction is, I think, with an organization's inability to harness data to drive positive change.
So then what is it that the platforms that are out there today need to do to step up their game and get there?
I think it's a hard question to just say it's a question for the platforms. I think as an industry, and this is getting a lot better, we need to improve data literacy. Just like we need healthcare consumers to improve health literacy, we need folks to understand that you need a common structure for data governance across an organization. And similarly, platforms need to spend time not just implementing technology. And I'm a technology vendor, so I have to take my own medicine. But we need to understand, what are the governance structures that have been implemented? How is your analytics team structured? How do you disseminate insights through your organization? And how can we be supportive of that and not antagonistic to it? And how do we resist the urge to create shadow operating teams, which is a really big problem today?
Yeah, I don't think the problem is with the technology and the platforms. There's so many great platforms out there. There's incredible technology. I think the problem is, not with you, it's with me, right? It's with organizations not having the other, right, people, process, and technology. The people and process really figured out, because if you don't have the governance and you don't have the teams, like we kind of alluded to before, it doesn't matter if you have the best technology, like you're not going to use it well. Or you can have very simple, very basic, even Excel-based centralized data working with a very good governance program with good people that know the answers that actually might be superior to the latest AI-driven technology.
I'm a proud owner of a Peloton that sits in my bedroom unused. Occasionally, like I lay my outfits on it. But it's a common problem with technology. We're here at HIMSS, there's umpteen million technology vendors, and everyone has a great offering.
Right.
But you need the infrastructure to use that technology, just like I have to get on that bike if I want to see a result. And I think that sometimes, and this is not specific to healthcare, it's a problem across all industries, buying the latest technology or even a technology is one part of the solution, but you have to architect a continuous system of change and improvement to use those tools to drive improvement. We talked about this with the advancement of AI and new models and a lot of the clinical technology. Just because you turn on a predictor doesn't mean that your clinicians are going to trust it. They know how to use it. They understand what populations to use that predictor on. And so I think that there's a real focus. And as a vendor, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're not just saying, hey, go buy my platform, it's going to drive change. It's, you need to implement a system of continuous improvement to use that and measure that and make sure that it's effective.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think the vendors need to kind of read the room when they're coming in, and maybe it is a really, nascent organization that just needs some technology to get going, right? Or maybe it's an organization that has a lot of political challenges, as you were talking about, where we're not quite aligned with even how we measure things, right? Or how we go through a process improvement life cycle. And maybe then we need less of your technology brain and more of your consultative services to help us with those softer things that we really haven't established that'll enable your product to be most successful in the organization.
So help me understand by describing this holy grail, but not just as the platform, the whole environment. What is the holy grail data analytics solution?
I mean, I really think it starts with process and people before technology. I mean, technology is an enabler for everything, but again, it also can make existing problems worse. And I think organizations really need to look at how they've structured their analytics programs, what leaders they have in place. I mean, honestly, my job is less as a, I used to be a software engineer, but it's really more of a matchmaker and helping people to get connected. The business has a problem. How do I translate that to a good question for maybe a data scientist to go and help really bring an insight back versus the old days where they just send a request over the fence to IT and then get some data back. Like, that's very...
Let's open a ticket.
Yeah, exactly. But I think I couldn't agree with that more. And I think the other opportunity, as you think about the Holy Grail, is how do you get to improvement? So it's partnering with organizations to make sure you understand their landscape, their needs. When I get a call from an organization, if Chad calls me and says, I want to talk to you about an analytics solution, I'm excited. I want to have a conversation with NorthShore. I want to talk about how we can help them. But it doesn't start with me coming in and being like, okay, here's who we are, this is what we do, and this is what we can do for you. It needs to start with, tell me where your opportunities are. Where are your challenges? How are you structured? What are the biggest questions you can't answer or you're struggling to answer, or that your team is spending way too much time answering that you want to drive efficiency around? And so my recommendation to vendors and to buyers of these solutions is make sure you're not just saying, tell me how you, Arcadia, can help us, but talk about the problem. Don't talk about the technology. And I think if the conversation boils down to tech, and not how do we drive outcomes from tech, I think we're all missing an opportunity to drive meaningful change in the ecosystem.
I think it's a great idea. Start with a gap analysis of where the holes are in the whole system.
Yeah.
And that might not be technology at all.
Right. Health systems, they want their problems to be solved operationally, right? They want themselves to get better. Right? Now, they think that technology is going to help with that, and it will, but they also falsely think that it's just a matter of turning on things in a box that are automatically going to solve really, really hard competencies in the performance improvement lifecycle, right? Or how I understand the complexity of what a particular data analysis might have implications for around a particular problem that the business is trying to answer. And who's best to even work with that team to translate that question into a meaningful data analysis, right? That bridges the gap between complex math and the problem I'm trying to solve, right? Like the soft stuff is the hard stuff.
One, how do you reduce the redundancy too? You probably have 5 different teams asking for inpatient length of stay on certain services. And if you have 5 different teams answering that, you have 5 different sets of data governance to tell you what a length of stay actually means. And you're not moving the needle forward, you're just stuck in place because then you're arguing with each other as to who's right. And so starting with what's the problem we're trying to solve versus what's the technology we need, I think is the first step. And I would encourage vendors and buyers to ask that question. Don't tell me, I want to see your widget. Say, I have a problem because I can't describe length of stay across my 20 hospital system with any commonality. Let's solve that problem.
Yeah.
Great conversation, Michael and Chad. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Chad.
That's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank our guests, Chad Konchak and Michael Meucci, for their perspectives. And be sure to check out the previous episodes of this series and the companion podcasts, which continue the conversations we're having. For HIMSS, this is Michael Krieger.